Good evening. Call to order the City of Mason Planning Commission meeting for February 10th, 2015. Could we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Barna? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Brown? Commissioner Fisher? Commissioner Hagel? Commissioner Hude?
Here.
Chairperson Reeser?
Here.
Vice Chair Sabadin?
Here.
Commissioner Scott? Secretary Waxman?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you.
We also have a quorum of the City Council tonight as well.
Great. For the record, Commissioner Fisher gave notice that he is ill this evening. Mayor Pro Tem Brown is running late from work. And thank you very much, Council, for joining us this evening. This time, next on our agenda, Commissioners, is approval of the minutes from January 13th. Any comments, corrections, or changes that we need to address?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes from the January 13th, 2015 meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. That motion carries. Next item on our agenda, Mayor Pro Tem Brown has made it in. Next item on our agenda is unfinished business. Commissioners, any unfinished business from last month? Having none, this next opportunity is our next on the agenda is an opportunity for people from the floor to address the Planning Commission on any topic related to the Planning Commission. Having nobody approaching, item 6 is the announcements. Commissioners, any announcements for this evening? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to take a brief moment to remind the Planning Commission that on Monday, March 9th, the City of Mason will be officially celebrating its sesquicentennial. We will be holding a ceremony here at City Hall at 6 o'clock p.m., and the Commission and the entire community is encouraged to attend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brown. All right, moving right into the regular business part of our agenda this evening. Tonight we have a joint discussion with our city attorney about the medical marijuana ordinance. And I want to take this opportunity again to thank City Council for being here this evening. What our point is for this evening, and in having our city attorney, Mr. Hitch, is here. Thank you, sir, for being here as well. And as well as Police Chief Strassman, we'd like to thank you for being here. What we would like to do is to open this part of our meeting up to be a discussion openly between the Commission as well as City Council after Mr. Hitch has been able to kind of give us an overview of what the latest is on the Medical Marijuana Act and how it affects us as a community. We had gone through this exercise some time back, and we were all in good state, with the state, and then, of course, the law has changed, and now we're back to not just getting an understanding of what's going on with the Medical Marijuana Act, but also where we stand with the moratorium that we have here in our community and the deadline that is approaching us and what we need to be doing and going forward. We do have a subcommittee that has already volunteered to go forward with this, but prior to going forward with that subcommittee and doing that type of research, we thought it would be prudent to have, council along with ourselves to hear it from you all at one time. Therefore, we're starting off the same page, same step, and going forward with what we need to do. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you, Mr. Hitch, if you could share with us an overview then and in details, please.
Thank you, Chairman and Planning Commission. I've prepared a couple of notes, and I'll talk from those notes. I don't know whether, Mr. Haywood, did you share the opinion that I wrote on November 5, 2014 with the Planning Commissioners? If you might remember.
I believe that I have.
Okay. Then I'll just go through it briefly.
So, yeah.
What I was going to say and start with that since that memorandum that I drafted in November 5, 2014, there have been no significant case law or statutory law changes And so the basic provisions of that memo setting out the status of the law remain the same. That is that earlier in 2014, the Michigan Supreme Court, under the Turbeck versus City of Wyoming decision, struck down the City of Wyoming's ordinance and a zoning ordinance seeking to regulate the use of medical marijuana, and it basically provided in its ordinance that it was relying on federal law, and that as the use of marijuana was unlawful under federal law, it was outlawing medical marijuana as well as other marijuana, obviously recreational marijuana, under the city's zoning ordinance. The Michigan Supreme Court struck that down, concluding that in a fairly broadly worded decision, holding that the attempted civil punishment of engaging in the use of medical marijuana violated Section 4A of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, and the city could not rely on the what we'll call the legal prong or the legal standing of federal law, which makes the use of all marijuana illegal, as a support for its position. It Supreme Court held that the Medical Marijuana Act, enacted by the citizens of the state of Michigan, preempted the cities, who are creatures of the state, from acting in a manner contrary to that act. Now, it did state, and this is the hook that all communities have sort of looked to in a footnote, that it was not deciding whether the Michigan Marijuana Act foreclosed all local regulation. And it's worth at least hearing the quote: "Contrary to the city's concern, this outcome does not create a situation in the state of Michigan where a person, caregiver, or a group of caregivers would be able to operate with no local regulation of their cultivation and distribution of marijuana. Turbeck does not argue, and we do not hold, that the MMMA forecloses all local regulation of marijuana, nor does this case require us to reach whether or to what extent the MMA might occupy the field of medical marijuana regulation." So the footnote clearly leaves an opening for locals to make regulations. The question, because it provides no guidance other than to say the question is not before us, what areas and to what extent local regulation would be deemed to be lawful and that would withstand local challenges to whatever residents or users of medical marijuana might bring before the courts. The law, that Turbeck case, then along with the prior decision that held that there are no dispensaries permitted under the Michigan Marijuana Act, are basically the two principal decisions of the state courts for the last 3 or 4 years. So we're now left with really what to do. There are no clear guidelines to establish the fields of regulation where the city may regulate. Our current ordinance is subject to the moratorium, which we've discussed. It essentially provides for the registration of primary caregivers and dispensaries, but it has no other real effect other than to make one appear before the city clerk, obtain licensure, and then engage on a yearly basis for inspections, make sure that there's no change in the plumbing or the electrical or whatever else the ordinance provides. There have been no new statutes enacted since the beginning of the term of the legislature. That's not surprising, since the term just ended last December. As I assume everyone understands, when a law is introduced in the prior term and is not enacted, that law lapses. And so it's as if it was never introduced. Right after the beginning of the year, a bill that was introduced last year that would amend Section 7 of the Act, which would make it a little clearer what medical marijuana users could or couldn't do, where they could use it, where they couldn't use it, and that would be a direct amendment to the act, has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. It was an act that was introduced in the prior legislation. It was not enacted in the prior term. I don't have any idea whether this legislature will be more receptive to this sort of regulation. The import is that, again, it gets into the legislature determining the rules of the use of medical marijuana, and it does not at all address the areas such as zoning or any sort of local regulation that that local communities might desire to engage in. At this point, there really is no change in the law, as I think this commission understood, that there really are no clear guidelines to the regulation. It's really up to the city. Others are going to, I assume, speak to this, of what the goals and objectives and the options that are available. I will share with you one city's experience. The city of East Lansing adopted a medical marijuana ordinance, and it basically, I shouldn't say followed ours. My belief is that the City of Mason ordinance was patterned after the City of East Lansing ordinance. And it provides for the registration of, it does not permit dispensaries, but provides for the registration of primary caregivers. I spoke with the city clerk this afternoon, and this ordinance has been in effect for 3 years, probably anyway. No one has come in to register. The city, through resources, probably has not thought about and not provided a lot of resources in terms of the enforcement. I'm not here to speak on behalf of the city of East Lansing, although, as you well know, our office we're the city attorneys. But I only wanted to bring this to the commission's attention because it probably, if this commission and council revoke the moratorium and then as went into effect, it might have the same result. No one's coming in and voluntarily indicating to the city and going through whatever the minimal levels of regulation are. To the extent that the city would desire to make certain conditions of having the license, if they didn't register with the city, my sense is that would bring about a strong challenge from users, and then the city would have to determine if it wants to go down that path to use the resources of the city to defend such an ordinance. Again, those are the sorts of policy questions that these two boards need to decide, and it's not really my decision. But I only wanted to bring that to your attention, because that was my suspicion before, that no one had registered, but I hadn't asked the question. But it at least gives you some anecdotal evidence of, without, I guess this goes into more of my opinion, I think without more direction from the legislature, local regulations will, if they're not too onerous, be ignored. If they're determined to be onerous, they're going to be vigorously challenged. And so that's sort of where I think communities find themselves these days. You can adopt it, and it doesn't necessarily mean a lot, or you can adopt it and it has some teeth in it, and then all you've done is buy yourself a lawsuit. So with that, I can answer any questions. I hope I provided some background for this meeting, but again, I can answer any questions that you might have, and hopefully can help in the discussion with tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions that you have for Mr. Hitch? Or council members? I guess while everybody's pulling their thoughts together, I do have one question.
Sure.
We currently have the moratorium. And in facing the deadline that's coming up on that moratorium, and with what you just reviewed, are we, is extending that moratorium an option that we should look at, or I guess I'm still kind of wondering which direction we really need to go, because
And that's a
nothing
good
at all
question.
is...
And that's a good
a
question,
target.
and I should have addressed that because I had made some notes to do that. You have discretion to extend the moratorium. There is probably some point, I don't believe we've reached it, but there is probably some point at which someone could challenge the moratorium. I don't know whether anyone would, just simply because it has just gone on too long. If the council, and I think in the commission, have a further interest in doing further regulation, then, or modifying the existing ordinance, then extending the moratorium, in my opinion, would be appropriate. There are, and I did make some notes, there's probably some communities in Colorado that probably have developing some data on the experience of having medical marijuana dispensaries, a little more widespread use of marijuana, to the extent that there are some communities around the country that are going through this experience to do some further investigation of that to determine whether there are indeed secondary effects, whether there are impacts that are not merely hypothetical or genuine. Those are good reasons to extend the moratorium if the Commission wants to further, and I should say the Council wants to further extend the moratorium. But at some point, and as I say, I don't think this is quite yet, we should either enact the ordinance or repeal the ordinance or make some modifications and not continue to do the moratorium. But I don't think, if you want to extend it again, I don't think there's any legal impediment, but there surely may be. Why are we continuing to do this if we're not going to make any change, and if it doesn't look like there's any substantive guidelines coming from the legislature in the near future?
All right. Go ahead, John.
Several Michigan communities have decriminalized marijuana. Has any case law popped up from any of those that affects our decision?
I have seen no reported decisions. I don't know whether there's any local circuit court decisions that wouldn't, other than receiving some press, which I've not seen. I don't think that there's any local ordinances that would give any guidance to us in the terms of the decriminalization. A lot of the decriminalization basically is it's no longer criminal. It's a civil infraction. I don't know of any challenges that have been brought. I don't even know necessarily who would challenge it to say that this community must make the recreational use of marijuana illegal. The fact of the matter is it is illegal under state law. If the local police determine that they want to prosecute and the local ordinance doesn't provide it, they can still prosecute under the state law. So it doesn't provide any guidance to us one way or the other, but I haven't seen any case law that would impact these two bodies' decisions.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hitch, for being here tonight. Two brief questions for you. The first is that you mentioned dispensaries, as it currently stands, are found to be not legal.
That's correct.
So if we were to have an ordinance in place, or at least the current ordinance that we have, we would need to at least remove the language governing dispensaries.
That is correct.
Okay, and then secondly, would you be able to speak to any of the conflicts that exist right now between federal decisions concerning law enforcement? I believe I read that the federal government's starting to take more of a lax approach, and then I guess maybe the chief might be able to elaborate on state and local law enforcement. But it seems to me that there is at least a double standard right now in terms of what's being enforced from a federal level and what's being enforced from a state and local level.
Well, and I think that's a fair observation. There's just Health and Human Services, a memo that I just took a look at under the certain provisions in the federal spending measure Under a provision, states where medical pot is legal would no longer need to worry about federal drug agents raiding retail operations. Agents would be prohibited from doing so. Now, as a matter of administrative policy, I think that that's what the federal government has been doing. The concern I guess I would have is, once there's an administration change, I'm not saying there necessarily will be, but if there is an administration change, that may change the federal government's protocols, or whether they're going to decide we now will take a more aggressive stance against state medical marijuana use. So you're right. The federal government appears now where those statutes are in existence. The federal agents are not enforcing them now. Whether that will extend beyond this term of this administration, I surely can't predict. And then in terms of state and local, maybe the chief has some comments on that. My sense is, at least as I read the case law, there continues to be a lot of prosecutions for people with marijuana. They're raising defenses from the medical marijuana provided by the Act. Some of them have been upheld, but some have not. It just leads me to believe that there have not been a slackening of enforcement of marijuana, and I think a lot of it depends on the quantity of marijuana. I think someone in possession of one marijuana cigarette or a marijuana cookie or something like it, that's one thing. It's probably going to not be prosecuted vigorously. The larger amounts of quantity, or the larger quantities of marijuana in someone's possession give you a greater likelihood that there will be prosecutions. So I think it's more based on just the scale of the amount of marijuana. But maybe the chief has some thoughts on that as well.
Chief Stressman, would you like to chime in? There's a microphone right there. You don't have to come all the way up even. We'll allow you to sit and be comfortable, as long as we're going to put you on the spot anyway.
As far as recent state activity, medical marijuana, I think that can be Rick Jones has introduced Senate Bill 72 that restricts the use of marijuana in different places. Particularly, I think it looks like if somebody is a landlord who didn't want to use medical marijuana in the building, particularly prohibit people from smoking marijuana. That's the only activity I can see at this point. I will tell you this, from MACP perspective, another one is coming down, assuming the Rutland Fields is all town in that The reason I say that is big youth knowledge. We at the MACP are suspicious as to the motives of the former leadership that in association with the marijuana producer in Canada, and whether he was going to gain full employment through his act of his cause. The reason, however, that the chief of police is not contested it was because of the unfettered amounts of marijuana that anybody, anytime, any dirt can invest into distribution of what is still basically by law, I know this, but it's illegal to possess. It's illegal to use in the state of Michigan. There are just a class of people, and I explained to you the last time that we talked about this, that are protected, and if you are immunized from prosecution based on the medical marijuana statute. Well, let's understand something here. Personally, I don't care. As a citizen of other citizens, marijuana is to be legalized as long as it is controlled. real serious problem. And quite honestly, I think based on that information, and if the legislation is introduced again, that it would be a serious mistake for the city of Mason to allow these dispensaries that have unlimited amounts of marijuana that they can carry about and distribute unlimited times, make unlimited investments into the drug, and basically start syndicated crime operations. I'm against it for that reason. If the city decides that dispensaries are to be legalized, I'm the chief of police, I enforce the law, I respect the law, I'm here to protect the Constitution of the United States. Basically, it's always been my philosophy that I get my power from you, and I do what you say. So if I disagree with the medical marijuana law, then you decide that's the right way to go, council passes the ordinance. It's your decision, and I'm going to give it to you. It's fine by me. I'll let you do that. Personally, as a professional, I think that the medical marijuana bills and have been presented egregiously, simply poorly thought out, and not considered one consideration to the consequences of it. I personally, when ACP was in favor of the public act that controlled the pharmaceutical. In other words, it became that if the federal government would make the Schedule 2 narcotic, then it would be dispensed through pharmacy. Why they didn't stop it? That's not to say they're not all there, they're all there. Remember, when you're advertising to get your medical marijuana card here for 25 bucks, I got a suspicion that it's probably a side of the suspicion, not fact, I don't know. So anyway, that's my personal thought. If you have any questions, I'll tell you that the community pays my salary and makes our policy. I just enforce the law. And if that's what the community wants, then I'm not going to say no. That's not a bill I should.
Great, thank you, Chief. Any questions for Chief, as long as you stand right here?
Just want to follow up.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thanks, Chief. I always appreciate your insight on this. I think the city attorney has mentioned that dispensaries is probably an area that we want to stay away from for right now. But my question for you is with regard to the primary care operations. If Joe Citizen, if we have an ordinance in place and Joe Citizen comes in and registers and pays their $100 fee and gets whatever license the city would allow under the current ordinance, does that change anything that the city police would do in terms of monitoring or patrolling or any? I mean, I know there are limitations as far as searching and seizing, but where is that line in terms of what you can do versus what you cannot when a person has a state registered MMMA card and subsequently a city license to have a primary caregiver operation in their home?
John, can you make sure the microphone's on? I'm getting too close to this now.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Who gave you this? Mayor? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
No, there's still no control
Over.
the distributor. The distributor can basically carry as much as quantity as they deem necessary to conduct the business with no controls. I can't. They can say we can inspect. The end result of this whole thing was that the distributor
Had no controls over the distribution. Nobody could.
dictate and investigate that kind of activity. It is law enforcement. Again,
Did you understand it that way?
But also, I think that Brown is looking to what information would it change if I understood your question, change the conduct of the police, recognizing that someone has come in and registered.
Yes.
And I think that the standards of the police department in Mason would be such that it would not, but it wouldn't make one more likely to be surveyed.
Just a minute, Mr. Hitch.
Yeah.
We're getting interference on the microphones. Chief, if you could turn yours off while he's speaking, and then vice versa, we'll take that AM radio sound out of you.
For almost 40 years, nobody ever told me how to use technology. Been going by the seat of my
Shoot, that's all he's going to do.
So my thought would be that it wouldn't the fact of registration would not, as a general proposition, change either the mode or the reasons for surveillance. I don't think that would be permissive under the law. But on the other hand, if there were, as we say, secondary effects, if there was more traffic, if it seemed to be inconsistent with 5 caregivers, not caregivers, but 5 recipients of the marijuana that the provider was providing, the police wouldn't take a blind eye either. It just wouldn't be any different. Or shouldn't be.
I agree with that 100%. Like I told you, if the community, that's what they want, that's the way it is. I'd look at that, trying to monitor those kinds of legal activities or immunized activities as paramount to sitting in a parking lot watching for bar owners or bar patrons to leave. I don't condone that kind of activity. I don't endorse it. Although it is legal, I just think it's kind of like shooting ducks in a barrel or shooting fish in a barrel. That'd be a good trick, shooting ducks in a barrel. But no, again, the law is the law, and the community gives us our authority. If that's if that's what you want, that's what we're going to do. I don't agree with it, but there's some laws I don't agree with in principle, but I enforce them because that's what I'm told to do. I consider we're a professional police department, and we got to do our job right.
Councilman Drosha.
Just need a quick review. Does the MMMA provide for limitations on caregivers as far as the number of patients they're allowed to serve? I know they can only grow 12 plants per patient. They're allowed to serve
5. That's the limitation.
So,
Well, they would be illegal then.
so we don't have to worry about anybody growing 20,000 plants because they simply can't. 60 should be the maximum, right? Okay.
Well, at least if they grow over 60, they are an illegal operation, and consequently, the law takes over from there.
Now, it's not so cut and dry.
You have to know about it first.
But prosecutor won't always prosecute these cases. It depends on the severity. It depends on the intent. It's just that, all we can do is take the report, do the investigation, and submit it for arrest. Chances that you'll ever see a Mason police officer dragging somebody out of a house for violating the medical marijuana law isn't going to happen unless the prosecutor has authorized a warrant. Because it's just so personal anymore, it seems like. I don't know, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but it's just that way. Judge Tom Boyd just declared the law against transporting certain amounts of marijuana in certain parts of a vehicle on and on and on, based on a Mason case, unfortunately, that it's unconstitutional. That was one of Molly's cases. Molly had no control. Matter of fact, I take that back. That was an Ingham County prosecutor case, but it was one of our cases. And it's not unconstitutional, but that's the interpretation. Judge Boyd's entitled to his opinion. It'll go to the Court of Appeals, and it'll go to the Supreme Court, and eventually the Supreme Court will make a decision. They seems to be the last arbiters of fact and what the law is in all medical marijuana cases. Everything winds up there. And depending on your point of view on the law, that's good or bad.
Well, I guess in going off into that direction on, what is legal, the other aspect of it, colleague of mine from work, we just had a national sales conference, and he's from Denver. And some of the things that were going on out there in Colorado with it being legal is how do you handle the cash, or how do you handle the payments? Because, it's not federally approved, so everything is in cash. And some of the issues they've been running into is somebody knows that that's a cash operation, and what type of crime isn't so much on too much pot or what's going on with the quote-unquote legal part, but the robberies of such and handling the cash. I mean, he even told one example of a couple that made so much money that they bought a bank. So then that way they at least had the structure to handle the cash. I mean, that's really stretching it out there, far from where we're at today. But, I mean, those are the things that, what's the next step? What's behind that next curve as we're traveling down this two-lane road? And I guess I'm curious to know what you know on that part, for more or less the robbing part.
I can tell you these, not with, I'm not going to recite cases, but dispensaries are a draw for other things. Violent crime is one of them. Particularly Lansing, I guess, had an issue with that. There's gold in them there hills, to paraphrase a statement. This based on money, always about money. I guess I'm going to ask you, does anybody think that there is a facility in the United States that could grow enough marijuana to facilitate the needs of the entire state of Colorado? Do you think that probably it's imported from somewhere else? Mm-hmm. Do you think that if under the last Michigan legislation, let's say, I don't know, Ralph Small, for lack of a better name to come up with, gets his dispensary card, and there's no limitation on how much marijuana he can sell. So he decides he needs probably to facilitate his business and to meet his customers' needs, he needs to import 100 pounds of marijuana. Do you suppose that he got that from a distributor here in Michigan? Maybe, but chances are pretty darn good that no, he didn't. Right. This brings in the illicit dealership. This brings in the cartels from Mexico. This brings in all kinds of illegal activity. And I'm not picking on Mexico, but that's just where this stuff comes from. That's where a vast majority of American marijuana is imported. The data proves it is from Mexico. So there's a really bad side to this, and it's all under the guise of making people happy. Okay, so some people are made happy and they feel better by it. Is it legitimate medicine? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. Doctors say no, it's not. Some say it is. But until it's controlled like liquor and other medications, then we're going to have this. We're going to be facing this problem. I guess you got to ask yourself: is that a problem that you want the city of Mason to deal with? Again, you guys are in the driver's seat here. Council's in the driver's seat. I'm only a law enforcement officer. My officers do what council and the manager and I say. So I hope that at least clarifies my point of view and answers your question.
It really does, because, as a group, we're a fairly new group of commissioners, on this staff. So when we went through this the last time, it was a lot of different faces. Some of you are sitting, at the table now. And, so we've kind of evolved in. We've got new people that are involved. And it's the type of thing that we need to hear it from both sides, from Mr. Hitch telling it, and from yourself, Chief, on, the good, the bad, and the ugly part. Because for us to go forward, we need to know what is in the realm of where we're at. And there again, not just running forward on, following through because we've got this moratorium, we've got a group that has already volunteered. They're ready to go to work. But if it doesn't make sense for us to go to work because we don't have the guidelines coming from not just what we want to do, but from the state, and we put 60 hours into it, and then all of a sudden everything's changed. Not that it's for nil. There's a lot of experience that came out of it, but there's no sense in spinning our wheels if we're too soon or too premature on where the state's going to be. And for my personal self, I remembered when we did this joint session before and had the same kind of input. And it was an eye-opening experience for both groups at the time to not just hear what we hear. Oh, we got to have this medical marijuana because it helps out and let's go forward. But there's a lot more that goes into it. And Commissioner Varna, you got a question or a statement?
Yeah, my question is for Mr. Hitch. Help me understand whether, I guess to back up a little bit from medical marijuana, can we decide that even if dispensaries were legal, that we didn't think that was anything that we wanted to have in Mason, and essentially it becomes not an acceptable, like if an application came up for somebody to build one, we'd say that's not an acceptable thing to build here, sorry, not allowed, through zoning or whatever. Or do we have to say, well, someplace in Mason you can have a dispensary, and that place is right here in the Central Business District, and that's the only place you can have it. You can't have it by a school. You can't have it by a church. What is our authority there?
Well, so long as the case law is not amended by statute, that is, the legislature doesn't come in and override the decision of the Michigan Supreme Court, the issue of dispensaries is one of the settled issues in the marijuana law. It is now illegal. Now, if the legislature were to say, and that under certain circumstances we are going to allow dispensaries, it is at least my belief that it would not mandate it so that every place would have to have dispensaries. That would be an area where there would be some local control. I mean, I can't imagine, that doesn't mean it can't happen, but in at least, why don't we say, what I would consider to be the reasonable view of this, that the legislature would not come out and just say it's going to be lawful everywhere, and everywhere would be a lot, and every community must have one. Because there is a standard of law in zoning that if it is a normal use, I shouldn't even say normal, if it's a permitted use, that communities don't have the independent authority to prohibit generally permitted uses. You can regulate them, but you can't, and so there's a long line of cases. As I say that, I can hear I could see a lawyer 10 years ago in Colorado saying there's no way that there's going to allow widespread unlimited use of marijuana. Well, that lawyer, if you'd have said that then, was wrong. My probably saying what's going to happen with the Michigan legislature 5 years from now is probably not any better than anyone else's guess. But so long as it's not mandated, I think that communities will be given the option, and many communities will just say no, they're not going to be permitted. So you would have that discretion. But right now, that's fortunately a question we don't have to address because the courts have made that clear that the act, as initiated by the citizens, did not really contemplate dispensaries. People wanted it to be construed that way, but I don't think a fair reading of it was that, and I don't think most people who voted for it, I guess that's a totally opinion, weren't thinking about dispensaries. They were thinking more about just how it came out, that it's just going to be individual users for certain medical circumstances. Hopefully that helps you? Mm-hmm. Good, thanks.
Commissioner Waxman.
So, just a couple things, Mr. Hitch. First of all, should we decide that we want to keep the ordinance on the books, obviously we're going to need to remove language regarding dispensaries. Now, I understand that the legislation that I've heard being proposed is to allow dispensaries in a pharmacy-style setting,
Right.
Where there's regulatory controls in place. So, I mean, we're looking at if that legislation, that's a big if, but if that legislation passes in the next 2 years and we rewrite this, amend this existing ordinance, we're going to have to amend it again once that information comes down the pike. But my question is, I guess, how enforceable is the ordinance from not only from a law enforcement standpoint, but just is it worth the time and resources of the city to have it on the books?
I think that's a very good question. Again, this is something that you have to decide. But I guess in my view, it's not clear to me that it's worth having an ordinance on the books, simply because the law is so much in a state of flux, and whatever local regulation that the city of Mason could, decide, or the city of East Lansing, or you name the community, there's no guidelines, and I think you wind up in the circumstance that I think I suggested before. If it's innocuous enough, no one's going to care and no one's going to comply, or if it's onerous enough, then you're just going to fight it in a lawsuit. And so, I don't see a winning position if that's how it's resolved either way. I don't think there's merit in adopting an ordinance that is not going to be honored, where essentially everyone's a scofflaw. But on the other hand, if you try to do too much, I think you're just getting into an area where you may ultimately be successful. I'm not here to say that particularly with secondary effects and particularly with sort of evidence that I think you would need to demonstrate that I think there are genuine health, safety, and welfare concerns about widespread use of marijuana and medical marijuana. But, you're going to spend a lot of money. So you just have to, again, that's the policy decision to be made by that. But in my opinion, I'm not so sure that the regulation, particularly at this point, is worth the time and the effort. And I mean, you may leave the registration in just to build a database to determine how many people are going to voluntarily come in. My sense is it's not going to be much different than the city of East Lansing.
A little historical data. If you remember, when this moratorium went into place, it was pretty trendy for communities to put moratoriums in place, because at that time dispensaries were considered legal, and that if the person wanted to apply for a dispensary and it was denied, you went to court. Lawsuits were flying everywhere until the Supreme Court made a decision about the dispensaries, and all of a sudden it stopped. That's why the moratoriums are here. And I don't know if that has any effect on what you're thinking along this line, but I'm not seeing where a continuing moratorium is going to harm anything, because there's really, as city attorney said, there's just no fight there anymore until legislation comes back up. And I'm going to tell you, the MACP Legislative Committee is reasonably certain that this is coming up again. Same bill, different version, some changes. In the last one, as I recall, it did allow for communities to deny dispensaries, as I recall. Wasn't that part of that bill? Yeah, that was about the only good thing in it. Right. It did allow for that. I imagine that's coming back in it now, because fortunately there are still some legislators out there to believe that local government is in the best interest of the local citizens. But if that makes any difference to you, these moratoriums were put in place for a reason, and that was to avoid going to circuit court and being sued on a regular basis.
Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Clark, you had some comment.
Mr. Hitch, if I understand everything you're telling me so far, just to kind of grab on, dispensaries have been determined to not be legal.
They are illegal.
They're illegal, so we don't have to worry about any ordinances or any regulation along those areas. But facilities to grow are. My concern about that, and when you say that we shouldn't put any legislation in or ordinances into effect, I'm wondering if we shouldn't at least look at ordinances to where we want grow operations to be. I certainly wouldn't want a grow operation in the brand new building that we're having rehab downtown. For a lot of reasons. Number one, it takes away from our downtown. Number two is that as a volunteer firefighter, I've been to a number of places that have been burned beyond recognition, and everybody had to wear their Scott mask no matter how far away they were, otherwise we'd all been stoned. Because the grow operations, because the electrical and those folks that do that really don't care about how they overload the electrical systems and those kinds of things. So my question, I guess, would be is that even though there are only certain factors of this law that we can regulate locally, it may not be an exercise in futility to be a little proactive in at least those kinds of areas and be out on the forefront. And once again, I don't think we'd want to be so strict that we, that somebody wouldn't be able to do that, but at least we could probably try to shuttle any prospective grow operations that we might know about into an area that we know can handle it, and for a lot of different reasons, and it would be palatable to them as well.
I think that's well stated. What I'm just saying is, as we sit here, I think there are lots of reasons to regulate the caregivers who are the growers. I don't think there's any question about that. All I'm speaking to is, at the end of the day, just don't be surprised if you're in the middle of some litigation. But that's not necessarily reason not to do it, because I agree with you entirely. I mean, the concern I have with and I'll be candid, the concern that I have, and there's no case law on this, so another attorney's opinion is as good as mine. The law, as written, specifically provides for caregivers to have 5 patients, and there's no indication whether this can be 2 doors from the schoolyard, it can be right in the middle of downtown where we don't think it's appropriate. All of that is absolutely true. The law, as written, has no boundaries. The question is whether, and this is maybe and I take this opinion in that Supreme Court decision from the Supreme Court as an invitation to the legislature to, do something about this so that the locals have some authority to do that. But absent that, it's absolutely true. But I think you'll just be involved in a lawsuit. I'm not saying that that's a bad reason not to do it, but I'm just saying everyone have their eyes open. That's all I'm saying. Because I agree with that. I mean, there's every reason to regulate a lot of this. I'm just saying the law, I don't think is enough.
And one other side of it, to benefit John and his crew, even if we put in an ordinance that required growers to register, so we know where they are. And then we can, if we choose, then we can follow up to make sure that they are indeed dealing with just 5 patients, not 105 patients. Otherwise, we just don't have a clue.
The problem is no one's voluntarily going to come in and tell us that there's the grower. That's the problem.
No, but if we have an ordinance and we find them, then at least we can say, hey, you know what? You've got to register.
They're not going to tell us what an upset customer is.
Well, I guess in my own experience then in East Lansing, they must have very happy customers because we've had no one's come in. but maybe that's one of the side effects of having a marijuana business. There you go.
Now, just to follow up, Matt, I'm going to suggest that you wait and see what the legislature does. They're going to do something. They're going to propose a bill, and this time it's going to pass. But it's going to depend, what's in there, a lot of it. I got to be honest with you, the last time it failed was because of the diligent response to the MACP and the MSA, which is the Michigan Sheriff's Association. We beat that dog to death, and they just let it slide through the lame duck session. But we had good reason for that, and that was the unfettered, unregulated distribution of the stuff. But I'm going to suggest that why jump through the hoops if you don't have to, or nothing's going to come of it when the legislature decides to change the law completely. So let's just wait and see what they do. Who knows? They might decide to go back to the proposal where it's all pharmaceutical distribution. You're also looking at a lame duck president and a opposition legislature that are going to fight it out. And the only reason the federal government isn't intervening in Colorado is because the Department of Justice won't prosecute anybody there. That's a fact. Read the paper, you'll see it. I'm probably you already know that. Mm-hmm. So it's gamemanship. It's all about votes. It's all about money. So, to me, if I was going to counsel you, I'd just say wait and see what the legislature, because it's going to happen soon.
Thank you. Well, I guess go ahead, Councilmember DeRocha.
Well, I understand and respect that opinion. I think we've been kicking this can down the road for 2 years or more now, and I think it's time to address it. Like Council Member Clark has stated, I think it would be prudent to at least lay out areas where grow operations can happen. And what's the only other area we can regulate is where people can participate in medical marijuana, right?
I don't think
like we could say you can't walk down the street with a marijuana cigarette. Right? You can't do that anyway, right? As part of the law, right?
Right. Yes, you can't do that now because that's part of the law. That's correct.
So maybe we don't even have to worry about that, but and then we could certainly adapt that if dispensaries become legal again. It'd be easy enough to say, okay, dispensaries can be in the same areas that we decided grow operations could be, not near schools or whatever. And may I suggest, we do have agricultural zoning. So it'd be simple enough to limit it. I mean, I don't have it in front of me. Maybe there are schools near some of our agricultural zones. But it'd be simple enough to limit it to agricultural zones. And that solves a lot of the problem right there.
Well, I guess to piggyback, though, the growing part of it. Now, when we went through this before, you were only able to, you could not have multiple growers working out of the same facility. So as far as to have a big, industrial building growing marijuana, right now, it's my understanding you can't do that. That if you're going to be a caregiver, you can only have your 5 patients and the 12 plants. So 60 plants is all that could be worked on that way, which I think kind of piggybacks off of what you said. East Lansing hasn't had people come in and volunteer registration because they can keep their 60 plants, and it's not like it's taken up an industrial building. Now, for clarification, if we're worrying about where those grow zones are and we can't regulate that anyway, are we spinning our wheels? I mean, up to a certain point. I mean, if we were to kick somebody where we catch them, it's like Chief Stressman said. If we all of a sudden, there is a upset customer that said, hey, over at 962, South Street, there's a grow operation. Nobody has that address, I hope. But then, we can send, the police there, and then we've got an ordinance. But the likelihood, I think that we need to look at this on a big picture also, that because there are grow operations in some areas that, yes, kind of like dispensaries, we want to make sure that we've got that ordinanced and isolated, that it's, on the side of town where you'd have, as we went through before, those adult bookstores, or you can't have a bar next to the church or the school and things like that. But, to go forward right now for that part, I'm just concerned about, with not having the opportunity, you can grow any more than 60 plants, and only one person can be doing that together. Is that still prudent? Because people are going to be able to grow in their basement anyway. I mean, about the only way you're going to find out is either A, Consumers Energy comes through and says, hey, this house over here meter is spinning, so you kind of know there's grow lights. Or like we talked before when we went through this, if all of a sudden there's a glow coming out of that house, from the basement, at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's probably a growing operation going there. So, I guess, on that part, we'll do whatever we need to do as a group. We've got the subcommittee involved. But at the end of the day, is it still prudent, or do we wait, like the chief said? And that's another reason we wanted to have you as counsel here, that, we will go forward with whatever you deem. But, at the same point, putting all the work into it and then it's for nil, we don't want that to happen. Or we definitely don't want to be part of a lawsuit, So, again, I appreciate all the openness to have these discussions, but, we want to make sure that it's prudent for all of us, You two both tied and you got the microphone. Go ahead, Leon. Mike, hold on for just a minute.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I'm not suggesting that we go balls to the wall and say that by the end of the month we're going to have an ordinance in place. But I'm saying that we should at least be smart enough to know. I'm not going to wait for the state legislature, because who knows what they're going to do, and if they're going to do anything at all. I mean, we can suppose, we can have insiders that say, well, yeah, this is going to come, this is going to come, this is going to come, and it may never. And then if something does happen, then we're stuck behind the 8 ball. We have to react. And I've always been one that would rather be a little proactive and take the time. Even, we don't have to, like I said, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but at least start framing something in that we can live with. Otherwise, I'm going to come in and I'm going to see David and I'm going to rent a plot down to the community garden and I'm going to grow my 60 plants in the community garden and you can't say a damn thing about it. And I don't think we want that. So that's why I say let's try to stay out a little bit in front of it, as opposed to just kind of sitting on our thumbs and doing nothing.
Mayor Waltz, you had a comment.
Thank you, Chairman Reeser. When we embarked on this gray area endeavor several years ago, we went down the path of the moratorium, and your colleague, Mr. McGinty, advised us that that would be the prudent thing to do at the time, but he also cautioned us that you can't just operate under an enacted moratorium indefinitely. In fact, he suggested that it would be highly unlikely that we could continue to do so for as long as we have. And the conditions to enact a moratorium, it was recommended to us that we had to show that we were making significant progress towards enacting something with some teeth or something that would be appropriate for our community. And if I'm hearing correctly, you're kind of suggesting that maybe we repeal what we've got, enact another moratorium, and sit back and wait to see what the legislature does or what case law then maybe suggests would be appropriate to do, which may or may not be okay, but should we at least continue to study and review and keep our subcommittee in place in the process of reviewing it or staying on top of it so we can demonstrate that? I mean, what would be your recommendation along that path?
I think that would be the prudent thing to do, is to, if we're going to keep the moratorium in place, then you do need to demonstrate that you're moving in some direction. And so I think that would be the prudent thing to do. In terms of, again, you just can't go on indefinitely. And so at some point, and as Leon said, I mean, that we basically have a general idea, I think, of where we think certain grow operations should go or should not go. That you can craft something for that. But again, I think the bigger picture is, and maybe everyone's basically decided, we want to regulate something, and particularly the location of grow operations. If that's a consensus, then that's something that you can move towards doing. But I think it is important that you demonstrate that you are doing something. Otherwise, the moratorium probably should be repealed. and then you either repeal the existing ordinance, start over, or have no ordinance at all. Because the effect now is you've got an ordinance that we're just holding in abeyance indefinitely. That's really contrary to the intention of the moratorium. It was to make sure, particularly with dispensaries, you didn't want to have someone get a dispensary and then they claim they have a right to, because under zoning ordinance you can claim a non-conforming use, and that's what you want. That's why you normally have moratoriums going into effect, so that you prevent someone from, before you get into the regulating some activity, someone claims, I was there first, whatever zoning laws that you enact now don't apply to me. So, I mean, that's the whole purpose of this. So, and it's a genuine concern. I think that's absolutely right. So it's reason enough to keep it up, but we need to be moving in some certain direction.
Thank you. Just a minute. Councilmember Mulvaney was up first.
Well, common sense tells me that we're only about a little less than a mile and a quarter square city. And anything that you try and do to legislate where growers are or dispensaries are is of little or no value unless it's going to be regionalized with at least the 3 surrounding townships. So that's going to be a great undertaking for you if you decide to do that. But whatever you do without their cooperation, without buying into similar ordinances, you just forced it just outside the city. So everything was in vain.
Mayor Waltz.
The thought crossed my mind to look back upon our recent history on this particular situation. There are new faces on both panels. When the Planning Commission first took this up, initially, they narrowed it down to four possible approaches, ranging from a moratorium and doing nothing to regulating everything. And Planning Commission took quite a bit of time to come up with these. They were rational, logical approaches based on the present case law and based upon the legislation as it was currently being interpreted, which was neither black nor white. It was, and still remains, a gray area. But once those four, and it doesn't have to be four, but maybe that's what could come out of this work group tonight, is those four, or whatever number it is, solutions are thought through thoroughly and then consulted with the City Council, perhaps another work group, to get a kind of a consensus on what, and of course including the City Attorney and likely Chief Stressman, to see what would be the likely best fit for our community of Mason. And just a suggestion, it seemed to work well last time. That's what resulted in the present ordinance, which was enacted, which for a while was sufficient. Welcome any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chair.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I think one of the things that might be helpful moving forward would be for our city attorney, if you are able to do this, to maybe give us an approximation of any sort of legal limit on moratoria that may be established, because I think we are at probably number 4 on this, number 3 or 4. And as Mayor Waltz pointed out, at one point, former city attorney McGinty said, well, you know, you'll probably hit that cap at some point, but I don't think we've ever had a determination of what the cap might be. So even if it's just a range, that might be helpful. I know that if the subcommittee continues its work, we're going to get to May pretty soon, which is, I believe, when the current moratoria ends. And so if we really are going to take a look at this, and the subcommittee is going to make some recommendations, and council is probably going to consider anything from not regulating it to at least regulating it from a zoning perspective, we may very well have to extend our work past May. And so I'd like to know what our true time frame is, rather than rushing to get to May, but at the same time knowing that we can't do this indefinitely. So I don't know if that needs to be a formal city attorney opinion, or if you can just provide that through the city administrator. But I would welcome that information if you are able to able to do some research and at least see maybe what other communities have done, or if there's a legal precedent for issuing moratoria for these types of matters.
To that, I don't have any problem doing that, obviously.
Commissioner Sabin.
I guess this is actually geared more towards Mr. Haywood. How many times has this moratorium been passed, the current one? Because my understanding is back several years ago, there was a moratorium that had been passed several times, and then we passed the ordinance, and everything at that point all was well at that point. And then law changed, or case law or whatever, everything changed, and now we had to pass a moratorium again. And I guess I'm not clear of when that law changed, and then council had to, I guess, enact, if that's the right term, a moratorium.
Well, I thought I was going to make it through this meeting without having to answer any hard questions. I think we've had 3 total, and I'm just going off of memory.
I understand. That's fair.
We had a couple under the previous ordinance, and then we adopted the ordinance to ban all things federally illegal, that are illegal locally also. And then after the Michigan Supreme Court ruling, then we enacted a similar ordinance as to our first one, and then immediately placed a moratorium on that one. So, and I would defer to the attorney's judgment on this, but I think we're kind of considered that we're kind of back to square one and only have one under our belt.
I think that's right.
Yep. So I think we're in decent shape there, and I think McGinty had warned us not to go past 2, I think, at the time. So I think we could probably fall under that umbrella again.
Yes, but without doing a lot of legal research. I mean, it's so long as there's some movement and it's not your 6th or 7th go around. If we're at 2 and we're going to go to 3, that's not a problem. That just simply isn't going to be a problem. I wouldn't believe that May is going to be a problem if you want to extend it one more time. But at that point, I think that should be your last run.
So in a follow-up, then I'm sure, I guess that's what you just said. In a court, you could go to bat for us, and it's not like there's City of Mason is sitting still doing nothing. They are attempting. They had a moratorium, they had an ordinance, nothing's changed. They're moving. Just nobody knows which way to move right now.
And that's the point. And the courts are going to be, I believe, so long as it's demonstrated that this has just not languished. The concern is very real about particularly in the area of the zoning, of having established non-conforming uses that, particularly in this area of drug use, could be very, very harmful. And so I don't envision any sort of potential challenge that I think would be successful if you had the moratorium out.
One more time.
Even as long as 18 months, starting from whenever we went through. You had a moratorium, then you didn't have a moratorium, you start over at square one. Starting over at square one, I wouldn't think you'd have any problem with 18 months. I know the City of East Lansing had a sign ordinance moratorium in effect for a little over 2 years. May have been a little longer than that. So, and that went through 2 runs at the Michigan Supreme Court, and the issue never really came up. It wasn't deemed to be an issue that would get any sign owners any relief.
One last one, if I could.
Go ahead.
So my last one, I'll make this one quick. So when we proposed the ordinance of several years ago, I thought it was actually Taylor or somewhere downriver that we kind of used a draft or used their ordinance as a draft, and we referenced, I guess. Oh, Redford.
Livonia and Rockford.
So anyways, that's the one we used as a reference. Is there, and I know you say there's no case law, of course, but is there a community out there that you have seen or heard of that is kind of taking the bull by the horns and running with this? Or are we it? Are we the ones that have the bull right now?
I don't personally know, but there's now some listserv inquiry avenues. We can run this through the city attorney's listserv, and so we can make some inquiries so that we can try to find out. My sense is we're not alone, not at all, but I don't know where other communities might be farther down the road on that.
Thank you.
And Chief might know through the Chief's
got a contribution here.
Local chiefs, cities, townships, sheriffs, everybody's wrestling with what's going to happen with this. So no, we are not on an island. We are not trying to figure out uncharted territory. Once the state takes action, then all the, hopefully, dominoes are going to fall into place. That right from Detroit to Stockbridge to Munising, everybody's struggling with what this ordinance is going to do. That's what you were asking. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
I'll just add for context as well. When the council voted to extend the moratorium for this current period, it was actually because we discovered that the prior moratoria had lapsed. And so to your point that in East Lansing they have an ordinance and people aren't really knocking at the door to register, during that period where we kind of forgot that the moratorium had expired, it's not like we had people lining up at the door as well. So there could very well be, I definitely see the wisdom in putting something in place so that we can protect ourselves, but we could also go through this and find that nobody's actually going to come in and sign the dotted line and pay $100 when they can drive down to Lansing and get what they need. So I just offer that as context for both the commission and the council, that there was a small period of time where somebody could have legitimately come in and applied for a license, but that never happened.
Well, excuse me for just a minute, Dan. David, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a couple of things that I want to touch on after hearing a lot of the discussions. That I'm very encouraged to hear that we want to take our time and just a few things I want to touch on. I'm very encouraged to hear that we want to take our time and do things right. And kind of on the coattails of that comment, I just want to remind people that 59% of the voters who showed up to pass this law were local. And I only make that comment because I think it's important that we go out to the community and try to understand what their preferences are too. They came out and voted on this matter. They have an interest, and so I think it's important to know what their feelings are too. I imagine a lot of the same issues are going to be reflected that we've been talking about tonight, which might help us guide us on where we want to see these land uses restricted to. And in what fashion and what way, and I'm interested to hear what those comments, how those comments play out as well. I do want to touch on the issue about agricultural use. I heard a couple of comments about agricultural land and that kind of thing. The restriction on, from my understanding, the restriction in the law on land uses for caregivers is that it has to be in an enclosed, locked facility. So there has to be some way to contain these from unwanted users in that sense. So it couldn't just be out in farm field and that kind of thing. So it does have to be restricted to a facility. And each caregiver has to have their own facility. They can't be sharing a facility. They all have to be restricted to their own use exclusively. So I just wanted to make that clarification. So that might, obviously that might direct a little bit where these uses might, that we might see these uses or want to see these uses based on our input and our collective research and data, the input from the public, and the fact that they do have to be in a facility will help guide that decision. The last thing, I had a question I just wanted to throw out there. I'm not sure how it should be answered. Well, actually, I have two more. One, have there been any challenges on moratoriums related to this issue that you're aware of, Mr. Hitch?
No, I'm not aware of. And frankly, there's very little case law on challenges to moratoriums around the country, but they have been held. I know there have been a couple cases in California, but they're more the typical land use zoning issue, not necessarily related to marijuana at all. But there's not a lot of case law on it.
Great, thank you. And my last question, I know you had mentioned that in East Lansing they have a registration program, but nobody registered. Is there any way to find out how many caregiver licenses were issued with an East Lansing address without knowing who they are, obviously? That way we can kind of compare how many are registered there but didn't.
How many people have lawful marijuana caregiver cards that's issued by the state,
right,
who might be residents of the city of East Lansing?
Right.
I don't know what the FOIA to the health department that's issuing the licenses. I don't know what that procedure would be. I'm assuming that you would have to somehow be able to get into a state data bank, because otherwise the city's not going to have that information at all.
And the reason I ask is trying to understand, trying to make a comparison between activity. If they didn't come out and get registered, how much activity is seen in the community as a result of that many? So you can kind of compare the number of registrations to the activity, and is there a comfort level there or isn't there, that kind of thing.
I've looked into this. I've looked into this to try to get data. They have published data by county, but not by municipality. And it's actually getting into that database of caregivers is actually prohibited by the Michigan medical marijuana law.
That's what I was going to. Didn't you say that it's prohibited to gain access? Because as I recall, the original MMA provided privacy protection for the card holders and for the distributors or caregivers. So none of that information is going to be accessible to you yet.
Well, in reviewing everything that we've been discussing, we know that right now we've got an ordinance. We do have the moratorium in place, but we've got an ordinance that needs to be rewritten. We know we've got language that's in that ordinance, as far as dispensaries that we know are illegal. So as far as that, we've already got a subcommittee and looking for some direction. We already know we've got that topic that can be addressed to take a look at the ordinance and do the rewrite with that. And being able to do some of the research of the discussions that we've had, this evening. By May, if we don't have something, then it sounds like we can very much be able to come to council and say, here's what we've got. We're not prepared tonight to meet that moratorium. We do need the extension. And in pursuing that part, if by chance somebody decides they want to contest the moratorium, does that show that we're at least working on it? I mean, one thing I don't want to hear, outside of this room, even in this room, that we've been kicking the can for 2 years, because that's not true. We have had laws that have changed. It's been a moving target. And we've had people that put a lot of hours into working on this. So, we don't want to end up putting a lot of hours again and then have everything change. And then we sit back here in 2 more years and go, what have you guys been doing? So, we've got people that are interested in investing for our community. We just want to make sure that the direction that they're going is going to be at least appreciated for the community, that we do have a foundation going forward, and that it's not going to be in 2 years we're still kicking the can, because, tonight we've been going for a long period of time, just going like we have. And, we already know some of those things, like with what David had shared, that you can't just go out and grow openly in the yard. You can't go out and smoke openly outside. Those are things we already know. But, we want to make sure that we're at least doing our due diligence to make sure that everybody is covered, and that, for yourself, that you've got some wherewithal to work with. And if that sounds like it's a plan, then by all means, this group is to the, serves the council, which serves the community. We'll go forward with that part of it. But, our main thing is that direction. because, every one of us, once we start looking at that case law, it's all over the place. So, Commissioner Bonner, go ahead.
I guess I feel like what I've heard is that there really are a number of options, because there's the repeal it and do nothing, and then the risk that you take is that the legislature does pass something, which it sounds like they may very well do, and then people can start doing whatever they want if we don't have, so it does seem like there are some options that we can explore, like the mayor said, in terms of what you guys did last time, of trying to lay out what are those things that we can do and not do, and what would be the pros and cons of each of those things. And then our subcommittee can put that together, bring it back to the Planning Commission, who can ultimately bring it back to the council. I think I guess as a member of the subcommittee, I'm in agreement with that plan. I think I'm not hearing that this is an issue that we can just not do anything on.
Right.
So.
Council members, is that kind of where you're feeling on directive where to take off with and solve where we're at and comfortable with going forward, so at least we start putting that plan together? Councilmember Drosha.
I'm in absolute agreement with that. But I do want to recognize Commissioner Waxman's point that whatever we do kind of needs to be enforceable. So with that in mind, could the subcommittee, think about that aspect, how enforceable is whatever we do? Okay.
Yeah, that would be, in carrying on and, from everything they've heard tonight, for the subcommittee as well as, what we've discussed before, there may be another session, being able to utilize, Mr. Hitch and Chief Stressman of, as they get going down through, because, we're going to have the notes from tonight that we can refer back to. But, as a collective group, you get going down there could be questions, and, we'll address those and make sure it's brought up and, keep you guys comprised of what's going on that way. Mayor Waltz.
I think that's a good approach, and I would also suggest that as the subcommittee reports back to the Planning Commission as a whole, and this is kind of in the formative stage, you could also utilize Mayor Pro Tem Brown as the liaison to be a conduit between the Planning Commission and Council to just keep Council apprised of what's the status is, and if there are any feedback or comments that could go back. It's a bi-directional communication that
absolutely
between now and what I assume will be a future joint work group to discuss this. So that could be how we could proceed.
Beautiful. Definitely will utilize his services. Great. Commissioners, any additional questions, comments for City Attorney, the Police Chief, or the council members? Great. I think that we've exhausted that part of it so that everybody can go back for thought. And if you guys have additional questions, just as Mayor Waltz was saying, follow them back through, shoot us an email, whatever. But we'll go forward, with this directive and get some answers taken care of. So I thank you guys very much for being here this evening. It's been very helpful and very informative, and it's always nice to see you anyways. So thank you. All right. Unfinished business, commissioners. We've kind of got unfinished business on there twice. New business. Having none. Correspondence, we've got the planning and zoning news before us. Any other correspondence, commissioners, to share with the group? Liaison reports. Mayor Pro Tem Brown, tell us in front of your peers what's going on with City Council.
Well, everyone from council is going to keep me honest tonight. But since the last time the Planning Commission met, the City Council met on both January 19th and also on February 2nd. There have been 6 resolutions that have passed over the course of those 2 meetings. We passed a resolution amending the employment contract with City Administrator Colburn and extending that for a year. We passed a resolution appointing Kenneth Baker as the new director of the Department of Public Works. We passed a resolution approving the recommendation to go out to bid to replace the storm and sanitary sewers in the alley behind 124 and 140 East Ash Street as part of the redevelopment project for the mixed-use property there. We passed a resolution that approves the Delhi Charter Township Fire Services Agreement for the coming year. We passed a resolution that appointed Rita Vogel to the Historic District Commission. And finally, we passed a resolution that adopted the Municipal Employee Retirement System Defined Benefit Agreement for city employees under the Fraternal Order of Police Collective Bargaining Unit. In addition to those 6 resolutions, we also did make some announcements about future council meeting dates. The first is that our May 4th City Council meeting has been canceled due to the state election on May 5th. And as a result, we have rescheduled our first meeting in May to May 6th. That is a Wednesday. That will be at 7:30 p.m. here in the council chambers. And what's important about that date is that will also be the public hearing for the 2016 budget. And so we're going to continue to publicize that so that residents know that will be an opportunity to come out and give comment. And secondly, also along the same lines, on the budget, the City Council has announced that our work sessions on the budget will be April 8th and April 9th, 2015 at 5:30 p.m. And so that will be when we receive the budget presentation from City Administrator Colburn and also begin our deliberations. That is a brief synopsis of what has transpired over the past 2 meetings. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Commissioners, any questions, comments? I guess you're off the hook, Mr. Brown.
Good.
All right, Director's Report. Mr. Haywood, you didn't get to talk much tonight. That doesn't mean you can go on for hours now either.
Darn. Not a whole lot new to report, but I will announce that the pedestrian trail bridge over the Sycamore there between Maple Grove Cemetery and Jefferson Street, the specifications were approved by the state. We received verbal approval, so we're waiting for the paperwork to follow, and once we get that, we'll go out to bid for that project. So really happy to see that project come to fruition. We're really looking forward to leaving a legacy as part of that trail system. Also, we're working with the sub-area planning committee. We look like we may be meeting next Wednesday night. We were shooting for a later date to include Mayor Pro Tem Brown, but it appears that the schedules seem to fall with the most people in attendance next Wednesday, so we'll confirm that the following day. And that's about all I had to report this time.
Thank you, David. Commissioners, any comments or questions for David? Thank you. Mr. Colburn, Administrator's Report. What do you have news for us?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of the things that are going on and ongoing, you're at least partially aware of, is in regard to the MISHTA and MEDC project at 124 and 140 East Ash Street. That's progressing. They have brought in a framework now for some of the windows and starting to work on that work and light reduction on the outside. You can see they've already cleaned up some of that, and we'll start seeing some visible changes around those windows and doors in the very immediate future. They're planning then to start working quite immediately then into the apartments upstairs, so the 10 apartments there. The staff has been working also with MISHTA and MEDC on 154 West Maple Street, which is also known as the Mason Shoe Store, and others there. I project that if things continue to proceed, that they'll go positively, and we'll see something pop there within the year. We're also working with the owners there at the Vault Deli in regard to 4 units with MISHTA going upstairs, 2 two-bedroom and 2 one-bedroom apartments. So with the 10 going in by this summer, we will have completed 36 units of rehabilitation within the city, and then we'll see these additional roughly 10 or 11 more units hopefully falling into place within the year. Very excited about that. Some of that is projection, and some of it, as you know, is under construction. The bottom line is that Mason truly is a success story when it comes to working with MISHTA and the rehabilitation programs.
And also, what we're seeing is working with the state in conjunction with both MSHDA and MEDC, that they're getting better at working together with the CDBG programs, the community development block programs, grant programs, and that's having an effect statewide. This is a very positive thing in which Mason's fortunately been able to take the lead on working with the state. The 150th has already been referenced, but just want to encourage all the members here to participate March 9th. It's here at 6 p.m. for the birthday of the city of Mason. We brought on a new police officer, Officer Jeremiah Budd. He's been a police officer in Williamston. The city council had him introduced to them, and he's going through his training phase right now, the field training. So we'll see him out in the field more and more. This year is going to be a lot of street work in terms of the different combinations of programs in the current budget year and the upcoming budget year. Streets such as Maple from Rogers to Temple, Washington from Ash to Maple, Lansing from Ash to Maple. We're also working on a project on South Cedar Street from Oak Street down to Willow Creek, and then also some lights, safety lights and issues down along Kip at the intersections of Cedar and Kip and Jefferson and Kip. Also, we'd worked a couple of years ago with Ingham County, and they have secured. We've worked with them to secure the grant for Kip Road. That's an additional $400,000. So we'll see that project going later this summer as well. We're going to see a lot of orange barrels this year. That's good news. On the other side of it, that's a culmination of a couple of years of programs that we put together, as well as in Ingham County. And there's going to be a need to continue that. As you know, the election that Mayor Pro Tem Brown referenced to a while ago, moving the dates of the council meeting, are predominantly because of an election to vote on future road monies. And from my perspective, that will be very helpful to the communities, the townships, the counties, statewide, as well as MDOT, to get the job done, to better protect the community on having safe and healthy roads. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Commissioners, any questions or comments for Mr. Colburn? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Commissioners, it's been a very interesting and long meeting tonight. I thank you all for your contributions, and again for the additional perspectives and comments and the joint work atmosphere. Mr. Haywood, you got something you want to add?
Sorry, I had one more announcement. There was a ZBA meeting, I think, since we last met, and regarding the AutoZone site at 222 South Cedar. Their request was for 2 additional wall signs and additional sign area. That variance request was denied. So I know that was a project that you had approved the site plan for, so one of the conditions was that they received a variance for the proposed signage. So just so you're aware that variance was denied. There was some room left that one of the reasons for the denial was that it wasn't the minimum necessary. So they may come back with a different request, downsized in some way. But for now, the signage is disapproved. So we'll see where they regroup and come back with.
Great, thank you, David, for the update. Well, Commissioners, again, thank you very much for your dedication, your time this evening, and we are adjourned.
Sorry I was late. It's
You let that 4-letter word get in your way. I know what you did.